She thought her money could buy anything, until Judge Caprio reminded her what justice really means. The laugh that shook the courtroom. After 40 long years on the bench, Judge Frank Caprio believed he had seen it all. Every kind of story, every kind of person, every excuse a human being could make. But that morning, something different walked into his courtroom. Something that would remind him why justice, when done right, humbles even the proudest soul. It was a calm Wednesday morning in March, the kind that usually passes without much noise. The courthouse lights flickered on, the smell of old wood and fresh coffee filling the air. Judge Caprio took his usual seat behind the bench at exactly 8:15 a.m., as he had done for decades. His father's words still guided him. "Frank, if you're on time, you're already late." That lesson had built a lifetime of discipline and respect for every second of service. His clerk, Christina, had already placed a steaming cup of strong Italian coffee beside the stack of case files. She'd worked with him for 15 years. She knew how he liked it. Black, no sugar, no cream, no nonsense. Judge Caprio began scanning through his docket, eyes moving across the day's list of minor traffic violations, parking tickets, small-town disputes. Nothing new, nothing unusual. But then Christina leaned forward and spoke softly. "Judge," she said, her tone cautious, "you might want to take a closer look at the 1030 case." He raised an eyebrow. "What's special about it?" She hesitated. "It's Vanessa Montgomery, multiple traffic violations, reckless driving, and leaving the scene." He flipped the page and noticed the note in the margin, handwritten in Christina's neat style. "Third offense this year. Husband, Richard Montgomery." That name, it wasn't unfamiliar. In Providence, everyone knew Richard Montgomery, the real estate magnate whose donations could build hospital wings and whose name appeared on plaques across the city. Money and influence often moved in silence, but their echo reached every corner of the courthouse. "Third offense this year?" Judge Caprio asked, setting down his coffee. "Yes, Your Honor," Christina said. "But this one's different." She hit a parked car outside a school zone, damaged 2 others, and drove off. A teacher got her license plate. There's also, she hesitated again, handing him a second file. Something else. The federal prosecutor's office requested to observe the case. Judge Caprio looked up sharply. "Federal? For a traffic case?" Christina nodded. They didn't say why, but they're sending someone. That was the first moment the air in the courtroom seemed to change. Because when the federal government wants to sit in on what looks like a minor traffic case, it's never minor. He looked again at the file, at the pristine paper, the expensive lawyer's handwriting, the perfect signatures. Everything about Vanessa Montgomery screamed privilege, a life built behind gates, protected by wealth, softened by power. And yet beneath those layers, something told him this woman was about to learn what real justice feels like. He took another sip of his coffee, letting the silence settle. He'd been a judge for 4 decades, long enough to see people make mistakes, face consequences, and often learn from them. But sometimes people mistook leniency for weakness. And that's when justice had to step forward, firm but fair, to remind them that no one stands above the law. That Wednesday morning, Judge Caprio didn't know yet that this case would go far beyond traffic violations. He didn't know it would expose lies, money, and arrogance woven into a web of deceit. He only knew one thing. He had a duty to see the truth and to make sure justice wasn't for sale. Because in his courtroom, every soul stood equal, whether a tired nurse who forgot her registration or a millionaire's wife who thought she could buy her way through life. And in just a few hours, the sound of one careless laugh would remind everyone in that courtroom that money may open doors, but it can't close the gates of justice. But then something happened that no one expected. The morning session began like countless others before it, a slow rhythm of justice, where small mistakes met understanding and human stories met compassion. But that Wednesday, the air inside Judge Caprio's courtroom carried something heavier. As if the walls themselves knew that before noon, the meaning of equality before the law would be tested. At precisely 9:45 a.m., the clerk called a name that would soon linger in the judge's memory. Maria Santos. She was a petite woman in her mid-30s, still wearing her hospital scrubs, her hair tied back in a loose bun. Her eyes revealed exhaustion, the kind that comes from long nights caring for strangers, but there was dignity in her posture. She stood tall, hands clasped, nervous but respectful. Judge Caprio looked down at the file. "Mrs. Santos, you're here because your vehicle registration expired 3 months ago," he said gently. "Can you tell me what happened?" Maria took a slow breath and looked directly at him. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but humility. "Your Honor, I have no excuse. My daughter was sick. She has asthma. Between hospital bills and work, I just forgot to renew it. I know that's not right. I take full responsibility. I renewed it the next day and brought the proof." She handed over neatly folded papers, proof of registration, insurance, all in order. No excuses, no lawyers, just truth. Judge Caprio studied her face. The fatigue in her eyes told the story of long shifts and sleepless nights. "You're a nurse?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor. Emergency room, night shift mostly. It pays a little better, and it lets me be home with my kids during the day." In that moment, the judge didn't see a minor violation. He saw a woman carrying the weight of family, sacrifice, and duty, the quiet heroes who hold society together without ever asking for applause. He smiled gently. "Mrs. Santos, this court thanks you for your service to this community. You've already corrected your mistake, and you've shown honesty and respect. The case is dismissed." Maria blinked, stunned. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." Her eyes glistened as relief washed over her face. It wasn't about money. It was about being seen, about dignity. But then, a sound broke the moment. A soft, mocking laugh. It came from the back of the courtroom, careless, sharp, and echoing like an insult. Judge Caprio looked up. His gaze landed on a woman dressed like she had just stepped out of a luxury boutique, Vanessa Montgomery. Diamond earrings sparkled under the courtroom lights, her hair flawless, her outfit so expensive it could have paid Maria's rent for months. She sat reclined, scrolling her phone, a smug smile dancing on her lips. Next to her sat another woman, equally glamorous. They leaned in close, whispering, then laughing again. The kind of laugh that told the world they'd never known struggle, never known humility. Maria heard it. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't react. She simply gathered her papers, nodded respectfully, and walked out, head held high, dignity intact. Judge Caprio's jaw tightened. He'd seen arrogance before, but something about that moment cut deeper. Because disrespect in a courtroom isn't just bad manners. It's contempt for the very idea of fairness. Christina leaned in quietly. "That's Vanessa Montgomery, Judge. The 1030 case." Judge Caprio looked toward her again. Vanessa was still smiling, oblivious to the storm quietly forming around her. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One woman, tired but honorable, had stood before the court with humility. Another, privileged and pampered, sat at the back with laughter in her throat and contempt in her eyes. As Maria left the courtroom, her soft "thank you" still lingered in the air. Vanessa rolled her eyes and muttered, "People cry over parking tickets. Pathetic." The judge's hand froze mid-motion. That one careless sentence said everything. It wasn't about the ticket. It was about character, the difference between people who learn from mistakes and those who believe they'll never face them. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Christina's voice echoed through the room. "Case number 2024, TR 1847, Vanessa Montgomery." The tapping of high heels followed, each step confident, deliberate, almost theatrical. Vanessa walked toward the bench like she was walking down a runway, not into a courtroom. Even her lawyer, a sharply dressed man named James Henderson, seemed slightly uncomfortable with the attention she drew. "Mrs. Montgomery," Judge Caprio began, his tone steady. "You're charged with reckless driving, leaving the scene of an accident, and driving through a school zone at excessive speed. The report states that you struck a parked vehicle outside Lincoln Elementary School, damaging 2 others before leaving the scene. Is that correct?" Before her lawyer could answer, Vanessa laughed, lightly, dismissively, as though the whole situation was beneath her. "Oh, Your Honor, I barely tapped it," she said, smiling. "There was hardly any damage. I was running late for a spa appointment and didn't think it was that big of a deal." The courtroom went silent. Even her lawyer looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Judge Caprio kept his voice calm. "The police report states $8,000 in damage, Mrs. Montgomery, and a teacher had to move out of the way to avoid being hit." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "That's a bit exaggerated, don't you think? Nobody got hurt. I'll just pay the fine and move on." She waved her hand dismissively, the way one might brush off a waiter. That moment, that gesture, something shifted inside the courtroom. The audience, ordinary citizens who'd come for their own hearings, watched in stunned silence. Christina lowered her eyes. The air felt heavier, colder. Vanessa opened her designer handbag with a glimmer of annoyance. "Let's just get this over with, Judge. What's the fine? $500. I spend more than that on shoes. I'll just write a check." Her laugh filled the room again. Only this time, it didn't sound confident. It sounded hollow, almost daring the world to challenge her. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, but his eyes, sharp as ever, told another story. He'd seen arrogance before, but arrogance like this? It demanded something stronger than patience. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said slowly, "this is a courtroom, not a boutique. You don't pay your way through respect here." She smiled again, the same smile that had mocked Maria Santos earlier. "Well," she said, "that's how it's always worked before." The judge's hand stilled over the case file. Christina froze. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to quiet, because in that one sentence, Vanessa Montgomery had revealed exactly who she was, and exactly what this case was really about. It wasn't just about reckless driving anymore. It was about a woman who believed her money could erase her mistakes. And it was about a judge who was about to show her, and everyone watching, that justice cannot be bought. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence after Vanessa's last words. Her tone, the careless confidence of someone used to control, echoed off the walls. For a long moment, even the air didn't move. Judge Caprio set the file down gently, but his eyes never left her face. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said evenly, "you've had 3 similar offenses in the past 8 months. Each time, you paid a fine and walked away. No license points, no consequences. Is that right?" Vanessa shrugged, brushing a speck of dust from her sleeve as if the conversation bored her. "Well, yes. That's what fines are for, aren't they? You pay, it's over." Her lawyer shifted nervously beside her, his jaw tightening. "Your Honor," he began, "if I may speak." But Vanessa waved him off. "James, please. I've got this." Judge Caprio's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "This is not the same as before, Mrs. Montgomery. You left the scene of an accident. You endangered children in a school zone." She tilted her head, lips curling into a half-smile. "Oh, Judge, nobody got hurt. I'm sure we can settle this with a little fine and be done." The arrogance in her tone was as sharp as glass. From the gallery, Christina glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable. A few citizens waiting for their cases shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had seen entitled people before, but this was different. Vanessa wasn't just wealthy. She was mocking the very idea of accountability. Judge Caprio turned a page in her file. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately. "The standard fine for this violation is $500. Vanessa actually laughed. Out loud. "In this courtroom," she said, amused. $500, Your Honor. I spend more than that on lunch. Can I just write the check now?" She reached into her designer handbag, pulling out a silver pen. "Or do you take credit cards? I get reward points," she added, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Even her lawyer looked down, embarrassed. Christina closed her eyes for a moment, as though steadying herself. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "This is not a shopping mall, Mrs. Montgomery," he said softly. "This is a court of law." Vanessa shrugged, her smile never fading. "Well, can't everything be solved by money? It always has before." That line, "it always has before," struck the judge like a hammer. It was the kind of arrogance he had spent a lifetime confronting. He thought about all the faces he had seen in his courtroom. Factory workers, teachers, single parents, elderly veterans. People who came with humility and respect, no matter how small their case. And then there were people like Vanessa Montgomery, those who mistook privilege for power. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said slowly, "you seem to think your money places you above the law." "Oh, Judge," she said with a little laugh, "you're making this sound dramatic. My husband plays golf with the mayor. We've donated to this courthouse. I'm sure we can all agree this is just a formality." That was it, the final spark that turned the tension into a storm. The audience stiffened. Christina's hand stopped writing. Even her lawyer looked like he might faint. For the first time that morning, Judge Caprio stood up from his bench. The room felt smaller, heavier. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of 40 years of justice. "Mrs. Montgomery, you cannot call me judge as though this is casual conversation. You will address me as Your Honor. And no, this is not a formality. This is a courtroom, where the law applies to everyone, regardless of who they know, what they own, or what they wear." Vanessa blinked. The confidence in her smile faltered just for a second. "Excuse me," she said, her tone tightening. "You heard me correctly," he said. "Your husband's connections, your donations, your designer clothes. None of that matters here. What matters is your conduct, your choices, and your respect, or lack thereof, for the law." Her expression hardened. "I don't appreciate your tone, Judge. I came here prepared to pay my fine like a good citizen. I don't need a lecture about respect from someone who—" Her voice cut off, realizing too late what she nearly said. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed. "From someone who what? Mrs. Montgomery?" She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "From someone who clearly doesn't understand who they're dealing with." A stunned silence fell. The judge didn't move. The seconds ticked by, slow, deliberate, suffocating. Her lawyer whispered urgently, "Mrs. Montgomery, please, let me handle this." But she ignored him. "This is ridiculous," she continued, her voice rising. "I'm not going to stand here and be insulted by someone who makes less in a year than I spend on vacations." The courtroom gasped. The arrogance was complete now, naked and undeniable. But Judge Caprio's calm never wavered. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Frank, when someone shows you their true character, believe them the first time." He straightened his robe. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his voice firm but measured, "money may build houses, but it cannot build character. And what I'm seeing here today tells me you have none of the latter." Her face froze. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on her. "Well," she said finally, her voice dripping with disdain, "are you finished? Because I'd like to pay my little fine and leave." Judge Caprio looked down at the file. His next words landed like a stone dropped in still water. "No, Mrs. Montgomery, I am not finished. Because here's what you don't seem to understand. That $500 fine, that was just the beginning. I haven't read the other charges yet." Her head snapped up. "Other charges?" The shift in her expression, from arrogance to uncertainty, was instant. Her lawyer's pen stopped moving. "Your Honor," he said, alarmed. "What other charges?" "I wasn't informed." Judge Caprio calmly picked up a separate folder. The paper inside was crisp, freshly printed. "This file," he said, "was sent to my chambers this morning by the federal prosecutor's office." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Federal?" her lawyer whispered. Judge Caprio nodded. "They have requested to address this court regarding Mrs. Montgomery and her husband." Vanessa's face lost color. "Richard," she said, her voice suddenly small. A man in a dark suit stood up from the gallery, the one who'd been quietly observing all morning. He introduced himself firmly. "Your Honor, David Chun, Assistant U.S. Attorney. We've been investigating the Montgomerys for 18 months. We are now prepared to file additional charges, including conspiracy to commit tax fraud and money laundering." For the first time, Vanessa's perfect posture broke. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her lawyer looked as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. Judge Caprio said quietly, "Mrs. Montgomery, do you understand what that means?" Her voice trembled. This is some mistake." Attorney Chun continued, it's not a mistake. The IRS investigation has uncovered over $2 million in unreported income and falsified charitable deductions. Vanessa's eyes darted to her lawyer, pleading, "James, do something." But James Henderson's face had gone pale. "Your Honor, I was retained only for the traffic matter. I had no knowledge of any federal investigation." The courtroom was utterly still now, every person inside aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. The same woman who had laughed minutes earlier now stood shaking, her world collapsing around her. And Judge Caprio, steady, solemn, and silent, simply watched. The weight of justice was beginning to turn. The arrogance that had filled the air just moments ago was gone, replaced by something quieter, colder fear. But the real revelation, the true breaking point, was still to come. Because the law had just begun to speak, and it wasn't done with Vanessa Montgomery yet. For a moment, the courtroom stood still, as if time itself was holding its breath. Vanessa Montgomery, once poised and untouchable, stared at the federal prosecutor like she hadn't understood a single word he'd said. Her manicured fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the defendant's table. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There must be some mistake." But the man in the dark suit, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chun, spoke with calm authority. "Mrs. Montgomery, it's not a mistake. The IRS investigation has uncovered over $2 million in unreported income, as well as falsified charitable deductions. We have bank statements, emails, and recorded phone calls as evidence." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Her perfect posture sagged. Her diamond earrings swayed as she turned desperately to her lawyer. "James, do something." James Henderson looked helpless. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I was retained only for the traffic matter. I have no knowledge of any federal case." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The same spectators who had watched Vanessa's arrogance minutes earlier now stared in stunned silence. The room that once echoed with her laughter was suddenly so quiet. One could hear the ticking of the courtroom clock. Judge Caprio didn't speak at first. He simply looked at her, the woman who had mocked a hard-working nurse, who had laughed at the idea of paying a fine, who believed her money could silence consequence. Now, stripped of her confidence, she looked small, human, afraid. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said slowly, "do you understand what this means? Tax fraud and money laundering are federal crimes. These are not matters you can laugh off or write a check for." Vanessa swallowed hard. I need to call my husband," she stammered. Attorney Chun turned toward her. "Your husband, Richard Montgomery, was arrested this morning at his office. Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at your home and business." For the first time since she entered that courtroom, Vanessa Montgomery couldn't speak. Her lips quivered, but no sound came. Her world, the carefully polished illusion of power, wealth, and immunity, was collapsing in front of strangers. She reached for her chair to steady herself, her diamond bracelet catching the light, a small reminder of a life that was slipping away. Judge Caprio's tone softened, but his words carried the gravity of 4 decades on the bench. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, "you came into this courtroom today mocking others. You laughed at a nurse who could barely afford her registration renewal. You bragged about money, connections, and privilege. But what you fail to understand is that none of that has ever placed you above the law." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Money can buy comfort, Mrs. Montgomery. It can buy influence, appearances, and sometimes even silence. But it cannot buy integrity, and it cannot buy freedom from accountability." Vanessa's mascara began to run. Her voice, once dripping with condescension, now trembled with desperation. "Your Honor, please. I didn't mean any disrespect. I didn't know. I'll apologize. I'll pay whatever fine. Please, can't we work something out?" Judge Caprio leaned back, his expression unreadable. "2 hours ago, you were laughing in this courtroom," he said quietly. "You said $500 was less than the price of your shoes. You mocked this process. You treated justice as if it were a joke. And now that it's staring you in the face, you want mercy. Her voice cracked. I made a mistake. He nodded. You did. But this court has always believed that mistakes have consequences. She began to sob openly now, clutching her handbag as if it could somehow save her. Please, Your Honor. I have children. The judge's gaze softened, but his conviction remained. So, who does Mrs. Santos? He said. The nurse you laughed at. She works through the night to care for the sick, to support her children, and still found time to show this court respect. You came here with arrogance and left compassion behind. There's a lesson in that difference. The federal agent, Attorney Chun, stepped forward. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm placing you under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit tax fraud and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed across the silent courtroom, cold, final, metallic. Vanessa's eyes filled with disbelief. She turned to the judge, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her voice barely a whisper. Your Honor, I'm begging you please. Don't let them take me. Judge Caprio stood slowly, his robe flowing like a shadow of justice itself. Mrs. Montgomery, this court doesn't take pleasure in anyone's suffering, he said. But sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters. The agents guided her away. The once flawless woman, now trembling, stumbled slightly as she was led through the same doorway Maria Santos had walked through hours earlier, but with very different footsteps. Her laughter was gone. Her certainty was gone. All that remained was the echo of a truth too many forget. The law doesn't see status, only actions. The spectators sat in silence, humbled. Judge Caprio remained standing for a long moment, then quietly said, Court will take a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, Christina approached softly. Judge, she said, her voice low, I've worked beside you for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that. He nodded, exhaling slowly. Neither have I, Christina. She hesitated. Do you think she learned anything today? He looked down at the empty defendant's table, at the faint outline where Vanessa's hand had rested. I think, he said quietly, that for the first time in her life, she was forced to listen to something she couldn't buy. The courtroom was empty now. Only the echo of footsteps lingered, the sound of federal agents leading Vanessa Montgomery away. Judge Caprio stood by the bench, his hands clasped behind his back. The room that had once held laughter and arrogance was silent. Justice had spoken, and its voice had been unmistakable. 15 minutes later, the session resumed, but no one in the gallery was the same. The spectators spoke in whispers, some in disbelief, some in awe. Even Christina, who had seen thousands of cases pass through this courtroom, still seemed shaken. When the court finally adjourned for lunch, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chun approached the bench. Your Honor, he said respectfully, I wanted to thank you for allowing us to serve those charges here. We've been building this case for 18 months, and we thought it might send a stronger message if the arrest happened in public. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. You could have taken her at home, he said. We could have, Chun replied, but people like the Montgomerys have spent years believing they're above the law. We wanted the community to see that justice applies to everyone, no matter how expensive their lawyers, how powerful their friends, or how polished their smiles. The judge took a deep breath, then smiled faintly. You did more than that, Mr. Chun. You reminded people what fairness really looks like. That evening, the story swept through every local news station and headline. Trophy wife arrested in Judge Caprio's courtroom. Federal fraud charges filed. Clips of Vanessa's confident entrance and tearful exit went viral online. But to Judge Caprio, the media attention meant nothing. What mattered wasn't the spectacle. It was the lesson. Because behind every public downfall lies a private truth. Character reveals itself when no one expects it to. 3 days later, while reviewing new cases, Christina knocked on the judge's office door. Judge, she said softly, someone's here to see you. Who is it? She smiled. Maria Santos. Judge Caprio looked up from his papers, surprised. Send her in. Maria walked in wearing the same hospital scrubs, tired, but glowing with quiet pride. She held a small paper bag in her hands, nervous. "Your Honor," she began, "I hope it's okay that I came. I just wanted to thank you." He smiled gently. "Thank me? Mrs. Santos, you don't need to thank me for anything." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. Her voice trembled, but her words carried strength. "When I was in your courtroom, I heard that woman laughing at me. I saw how she looked at me, like I didn't matter. I tried to ignore it, but it hurt. I've worked so hard my whole life, and for a second, I felt small." Her eyes glistened. "But when I saw what happened later, when I saw that she faced justice the same way anyone else would, it reminded me why this country still works. Because the law still protects people like me. Honest people, working people, people who don't have power but do have dignity." Judge Caprio felt his throat tighten. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he replied quietly, "Mrs. Santos, you showed this court what real character looks like. You didn't come asking for sympathy. You came with responsibility. You fixed your mistake. You showed grace when someone disrespected you. You didn't need money to show integrity. You already had it." Maria smiled faintly, tears gathering in her eyes. "I brought you something, Your Honor." She handed him the small paper bag. Inside was a cup of coffee, strong, black, Italian style. He chuckled softly. "You remembered. I watch your cases," she said shyly. "You said once that you drink it like your father did. So, I wanted to say thank you, from one parent to another." He looked down at the cup for a moment, humbled. "Thank you, Mrs. Santos. You remind me why I do this work." She nodded, then left quietly, her footsteps light, her spirit at peace. As the door closed behind her, Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, thinking of the contrast between the two women who had stood before him that week. One had walked in with diamonds and pride. The other had come in with humility and respect. Only one had walked out free. A week later, federal investigators released more details. The Montgomerys had been running their scheme for 5 years, hiding income, creating fake charities, fabricating donation receipts. They'd cheated the government out of millions. Richard Montgomery took a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, full restitution, and the seizure of all assets. Vanessa Montgomery chose to stand trial and lost. 12 years in prison. When the news broke, the headlines were loud, but the public reaction was quiet. Because deep down, everyone understood what the case really meant. Justice hadn't targeted wealth. Justice had simply refused to be bought. 2 months later, a letter arrived at the courthouse. The return address read, Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. It was from Vanessa Montgomery. Christina hesitated before handing it over. "Judge," she said softly, "are you sure you want to read it?" He nodded. Everyone deserves to be heard, even those who learned the hard way. He opened the envelope. The handwriting was careful, elegant, but shaky. The letter began, "Judge Caprio, I know you have no reason to read this, but I need to write it. I spent my life believing money could fix everything. That comfort meant happiness, and status meant respect. But in prison, you learn what those things really mean, and how little they matter when you have no freedom, no peace, and no one left to pretend for. You were right. Money can buy a house, but not a home. It can buy comfort, but not character. I wish I had understood that before I lost everything. Please tell Mrs. Santos that I'm sorry. I saw her face that day, and I'll never forget it. I can't undo what I've done, but I can promise you this. I'll never laugh at another person's struggle again. Vanessa Montgomery." Judge Caprio folded the letter gently. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle. He kept that letter, not out of forgiveness, but as a reminder that even in the darkest places, reflection can still bloom. That sometimes justice doesn't just punish, it teaches. And in that quiet office, with sunlight spilling across the desk, Judge Caprio realized something his father had told him decades ago was still true. The law can correct a person's path, but only humility can change their heart. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable Wednesday morning, the day laughter turned into handcuffs and arrogance into silence. Yet even after all that time, Judge Caprio often found himself thinking about those two women, Maria Santos and Vanessa Montgomery. 2 names, 2 stories, forever linked by one courtroom and one truth: that respect and humility are worth more than all the wealth in the world. The news of the Montgomery case had faded from headlines, but its impact had not. The federal restitution recovered from the fraud investigation was substantial. Millions of dollars returned to the state. During a judicial meeting later that summer, the board proposed something new: a scholarship fund created from those recovered assets. The idea was simple but profound: turn wrongdoing into opportunity. Use what was taken dishonestly to help those who served honestly. They called it the Dignity and Service Scholarship. Judge Caprio smiled when he heard the name. It carried the weight of everything that had happened: dignity for the humble, service for the deserving. At the first award ceremony, a group of nursing students gathered in the courthouse lobby, the very place where Vanessa Montgomery's laughter had once echoed. This time, there was no arrogance, no diamonds, no mockery. There was only gratitude. When the MC read the name of the first recipient, the judge felt his chest tighten. Maria Santos's daughter, Isabella. Applause filled the room. Maria stood beside her daughter, eyes glistening with pride. She wore the same hospital scrubs she had worn that day in court, not out of necessity, but as a symbol of who she was and what she represented. When she caught Judge Caprio's gaze, she smiled, a soft, knowing smile that said thank you without a word. He nodded back, because he knew the truth. He hadn't given her anything she didn't already deserve. He had simply recognized it. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun filtered through the courthouse windows, Christina handed him a fresh cup of coffee, strong, black, the Italian way. "For old time's sake," she said. He chuckled. 40 years, and I still can't start a day without it." They stood quietly for a moment, watching the students laugh and take photos with their certificates. Justice, Caprio thought, didn't always wear robes or carry gavels. Sometimes it wore scrubs and hopeful smiles. He turned to Christina. "Do you remember what my father used to tell me?" She smiled. "Every morning, Judge. Frank, if you're on time, you're already late." He laughed softly. "Yes, that one. But he also said, the measure of a person isn't what they have. It's what they do when they think no one is watching." Maria Santos took responsibility when she thought no one cared. Vanessa Montgomery mocked others when she thought no one would call her out. Both of them revealed who they truly were. Christina nodded. "You think Mrs. Montgomery ever understood that?" He looked down, thoughtful. "Maybe." Her letter showed regret. Regret is the beginning of understanding. Perhaps someday it'll become redemption. The courthouse clock struck 4. Outside, the city hummed with ordinary life. Children leaving school, shop owners closing early, people just trying to make it through another day. And for Judge Caprio, that ordinariness was sacred, because it was the ordinary, hard-working people, the Mariahs of the world, who kept justice alive through their honesty and perseverance. He sat back at his desk, the letter from Vanessa still tucked safely in his drawer. He didn't read it often, but he kept it close as a reminder that even the most broken stories could lead to lessons worth remembering. He looked into the camera, the same one that captured every hearing, every act of grace, every human story that passed through his courtroom, and spoke softly to the audience who had followed his work for decades. "You know, after 40 years on this bench, I've learned that the best judgments aren't always found in the law books. Sometimes they're found in your heart. Money can buy luxury, but it can't buy peace. It can buy status, but it can't buy respect. It can buy silence, but it will never buy forgiveness." In this courtroom, a nurse and a trophy wife stand on the same ground. That's how it should be, and that's how it will always be. He paused, the warmth of his voice wrapping around every word. So if you take one lesson from this story, let it be this: treat people with respect, no matter who they are. Take responsibility for your actions. And remember that character will always outlast wealth. He smiled, the kind of smile that came from decades of wisdom and faith in humanity, and lifted his cup in a quiet toast to the camera. "Respect costs nothing," he said, "but it's worth everything. God bless you all, and God bless America, where the law still stands as the great equalizer." As the camera faded to black, The audience was left not with the memory of a downfall, but with the image of a simple truth that dignity, once lost, can still be found in honesty. And somewhere, in a quiet prison cell, a woman who once laughed at the law might finally be learning to respect it. Because in the end, justice isn't about punishment. It's about balance, restoring what's right, one heart at a time. If this story touched you, hit like, share it with someone who believes in fairness, and subscribe for more true stories that restore faith in justice.